So it's only fitting that yesterday I did a talk with a girl in El Salvador, that today I do another talk with a guy in El Salvador. Mark, how's Gila State doing these days?
Pretty awesome and unique and innovative and exciting and just everything you would expect with the merger of Bukele and Bitcoin and sovereign digital currencies and US dollars
So talk,
with now Trump in the scene. So
so talk a little bit about yourself. You're Canadian, you're Brazilian, and you're in El Salvador. How'd that happen?
so my mom and dad met in Long Beach, California, where I was conceived, and my mom flew back to Brazil to have me born in Rio de Janeiro because she didn't want me to be American, which is kind of the opposite of most, South American people coming to the States because she's like, I don't know, Vietnam was a thing, and she didn't want me to be one day drafted to some possible future war, which as a mother made sense to me. And afterwards, after high school, I almost joined the military, which my mom almost had a epileptic fit. She was like, "No, you're not going to. I did all this in my life to make sure that you didn't." I'm like, "That sounds like a really cool idea," but basically, I have a really unique background because my dad, my father's father, my grandfather in Canada fought World War II, and he was given this special military decree by King George VI because he was a lieutenant, which is what they call lieutenants in the Canadian Army.
Yeah.
And if you're an officer or higher in the Canadian Armed Forces or in the military, you came back from World War II alive and successful, you didn't have to be indebted with the war debt, which is how Social Security numbers, and in Canada, they're even creepier. They're called social insurance numbers, SIN numbers, were implemented. It's so far ago that most people don't know the original reason they said they came out with them was to pay back the war debt
Okay.
of all the costs that they incurred in World War II. And so they said, hey, we're going to need to come out to basically re-release taxation without representation, which is why we seceded from England in the first place. Of we're going to directly tax your paychecks, whether you like it or not, because we incurred so many costs fighting this war. And my grandfather was the accountant of the Canadian Armed Forces. So he knew all the forms and special ways of filing, special markings, and all these kinds of things on these documents. So he knew this special military decree or honor given by King George VI that if you fought and came back alive and successful, honorably discharged, you didn't have to be indebted for the war debt because you already paid it with your life, in your service. So basically, it was considered insulting to come back and have to then pay for your own service. So he was granted a special status that was given to all officers and higher. He said about 5% of officers or higher even knew about it. And then of those, only about 5% of them did it. Since my grandfather was the accountant, he knew all these things and he filled this form out, which made you never have to pay taxes. And even to your other generations and your generations. A lot of people aren't exposed to this kind of knowledge, but basically, this is trust and estates, offshore banking, all kinds of stuff that trace back
This
to
was Canadian taxes or US?
basically it was the same premise which released SIN numbers in Canada and social security numbers in the States was to pay back the war debt. And if you go into all this really deep stuff about trusts and estates and birth bonds, it goes back to the Vatican in 1666, which they said the c'est tu qui vis trust, which is French for it is you who live, c'est tu qui vis, which basically was made because conquistadors going to explore the new world after a week of them embarking on a ship, God knows if they're alive or dead, or if basically they made it to where if you didn't come back for 25 years, didn't send a telegram or notice, they had to presume you're lost at sea. And some of these guys left back whole kingdoms, estates, castles, farms, massive swaths of land. So they made it to where they were able to take that back into the Vatican. And if you showed up 30, 40, 50 years later and said, hey, I'm actually alive, they would give it back to you. But if you never reclaimed it, then it would be ownership of the state or property of basically the Vatican. This changed into case precedent. Even Thomas Jefferson talks about this in a quote. He says, "A departure from principle will lead to another and another until the world and its citizens become automatons of misery, knowing nothing but sin and suffering, and the forehorse to this is public debt." Sorry, but look around you. So this original departure from principle was basically the state deeming people as corporations through what's now the Warehouse Receipts Act and expanded into NAFTA, and basically treats us as corporate fictions, which even if you look up the term human in the Black's Law Dictionary, which is what the courts are determining as English, it says human is a sea monster.
It's
A,
what?
a sea monster. It sounds lunatic, but it's literally says sea monster is the definition of human. You look up the definition of monster is a being that cannot own property. So basically, a human is a being that cannot own property at sea, which were treated as if at sea or maritime admiralty jurisdiction, which is basically as if on water. It sounds insane to the average person who's never heard these things. But basically, my grandfather and my gave this honor to my father. So he was, instead of getting a normal birth certificate, he was given a war bond, and it has all these special markings. His name is underlined, has the stamp on it that says "not for family allowances," basically meaning you never have to pay taxes, and you don't get a SIN number, which is this tax ID, which makes you comply or have to pay taxes directly from your paycheck, grants them the ability to take it. So my grandfather told my dad, never get a birth certificate unless you absolutely have to. He got a statement of birth, which is the actual paper. The birth certificate is the seal that goes on, which now basically makes you a indentured servant to the state, which through the birth certificates, your mother is considered the informant on the document, and within 2 weeks, you're supposed to transfer this into your private estate. But if you don't, you default or abandon your trust, and basically floats from land to water. And the corporation, aka the country which you were born in or registered in, scoops it up and transfers it into their estate. Which basically, through the Chesterfield Trust of 1666, the term $1 million baby is where that comes from. It was around the 60s. This bond basically makes about $1 million per baby, which the state makes once that 2 weeks of default and they transfer it into their trust. Within that time, if you don't do it, then they get that fund, which you're supposed to get as a parent of your children and stuff, but you trade it in for essential services of police and fire and all the stuff that we normally take as, everything standard in a
Funny
country.
thing is, I have a living trust right here on my shelf in my office, and I thought I knew a lot about trusts. This has been educational as fuck.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. And I didn't know much about this. And my father started expanding on all the things and basically the inconveniences he had to go through not having a SIN number, because eventually, to get any kind of job, you had to have one of these things to be able to work. So he had to figure out doing private contracting. And basically, he built log homes with chainsaws, like Lincoln log, like cut the V's and the things, rolled the logs, and built huge log homes. Then he went out and he lived in Vancouver. He was born in Ontario, so he went all the other side. And some law came out in the 80s that said if you are in Canada on January 1st, you will be automatically given a birth certificate and thus a SIN number. And he brought it to a trustee law firm friend, and he's like, look, it's here. It says, if you are in Canada on January 1st, what if I'm not in Canada? And the guy's like, that's a good point. You should try it. And so back then, they had a border, but it was just like some mounting, like, oh, hey, thank you. Have a good day. He just drove across the border, even though he doesn't have a license or a passport or anything because he's sovereign. So he has a statement of birth, proof that he's Canadian, but, has no other identification. So he goes to California and he ends up meeting my mother, and they were, old school traditional. They wanted to get married before having kids and all that stuff. And basically,
You didn't want a baby mama?
what's that?
You didn't want a baby mama?
Exactly. No, he actually has two kids before my mom, so he has a boy and a girl. So I have a step
So he's
brother,
got a
step.
baby mama.
Exactly. So he didn't want another one. So basically,
Trust me, baby mamas are hard.
my dad said, "What?" Someone says, and anyone mentions about suicide, he's like, "Why would I commit suicide? I was married twice." So it's a bad joke, but basically, he said he met my mother and he explained all this. To her was like legal mumbo jumbo, and she's like, I trust and I know that you understand what you're talking about, but I have no clue what any of this stuff you're saying. But I trust that you know what you're talking about. But what I at least need is that you have a passport so that you can go back to Brazil with me and meet my family. And otherwise, I can't do this. It's just a bit much for me. So he goes to the Canadian embassy in California, and normal passport fill out application, name, address, blah, blah, blah. At the bottom, it says, "Do you want birth certificate?" And he circles no. And he goes to the meeting with the officer, and the officer's like, "Okay, go, blah, blah. Oh, here it says you don't want a birth certificate. Why is that?" And he's explaining the story of my grandfather and his dad, and told him never get a birth certificate. I absolutely have to, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, "May I ask you, like, why?" And he's like, "Well, my father told me to never get one, and I absolutely have to. So I presume that since this law came out and coming down here, and now you asking me if I want one, and me saying no, that means I don't absolutely need to, correct?" And officer's like, "You're right." And my dad's like, "Can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "Okay." And he said, "If I was in Canada and I got a passport, would you have even asked me, or would you automatically given me one?" They're like, "We would have automatically given you one." He's like, "Perfect," because it confirmed the reason why I left Canada in the first place. So basically, my dad said that the day he brought back the passport was the day I was conceived. Because my mom was like, "Finally, you can go back to Brazil with me," and they were married and they did the thing. So
Where'd they get
basically,
married? In the States or in Brazil?
so they got married in Vegas. They drove to Vegas, got married there, and they basically had me conceived that when he received the passport. So
I'll be honest with you. I think your dad, when he got that passport, he just basically said, "Fuck yeah, I'm making a baby."
exactly, it's like I've been waiting for this. So basically, my mom got pregnant at the time. They said you should only fly pregnant
By the
within.
way, ladies, if you're wondering, yes, I've got a passport, so therefore I'm eligible to make a baby.
Exactly. There you go. So my mom flew back in her first trimester to Brazil because it was a thing at the time. They said you should only fly pregnant within your first trimester. So she went back to Brazil. He stayed in California, and he showed up like a week or two before my birth. And I was born there. He met the family, and we moved back to the States when I was about 6 months old. We lived in Florida, and we went to Fort Lauderdale. And I went back to Brazil about a year and a half, stayed there till about first grade, and then came back to the Florida about third grade. So I actually came back halfway between second grade, and they gave me a test to determine where they should put me because the summer and winters are opposite there. So I was either gonna come into second grade halfway through or just skip and go straight into third grade. I tested for fifth grade, which just shows how terrible the U.S. public schooling system is. But I basically, they said, "Oh, we can't put you into fifth grade. We have to put you into third, so that you're not socially, developmentally, awkward with all these kids 2 years older than you." So basically, I think it was because of that. And in third grade, they had some musician scout go across the Florida, and they interviewed, basically examined 10,000 kids. And I was picked out of 300 to be invited to what's called the Florida Singing Sons Boys Choir. So I did all this choir stuff and traveled around. And then in the seventh grade, my
Is
mom
that
was just
Chubby Cheeks in the background? Is that Chubby Cheeks?
yeah, it
How many
is.
cinnamon rolls did she have?
She had one entire one. She just has the outsides, a little bit of the frosting.
You're gonna have to work with her. You're gonna say, "Hey, listen, Chubby Cheeks, you gotta go easy on the cinnamon rolls. Swimsuit season's coming up."
So basically, in seventh grade, my mom was sent some letter by Duke University Talent Search that they wanted to put test me in the SATs in seventh grade, and I'm at the time she's like, "Oh, they're saying you have to go do this test." I'm like, "I don't want to do that." She's like, "You have to." I'm like, "Ah," so I'm like seventh.
Why were they wanting to test you?
Some talent search thing. I don't know. Basically, maybe because of the high grades and the musician, I have no clue what triggered their system to.
So what happened after you took the test?
So I went to some high school, and I'm literally there with seniors, and I'm like 5 years younger than them. They're looking at me like, "Who the hell? Why are you here?" And I'm like, "I don't
Who
know. My
the fuck
mom
is
told
Doogie Howser? And
Yeah,
what
I know
were you
exactly.
the
I'm like, I
Canadian
don't know.
Doogie
My mom
Howser?
told me this sucks. I don't want to take this freaking test. So basically, I didn't do that well in English or math because I was just simply not taught most of the things. But I scored 99th percentile in science and reasoning section, which by the time I was a senior in high school, they removed it. I'm like, what the hell? Where's that section? And then I aced. So basically, it was probably because anomalies of kids like me acing this section in seventh grade. So basically, I did honors program and blah blah all that fancy stuff, and I was went on to be a doctor because as a kid I was always into healing. I could see energy and like figure out like this is weird. Why is this here? And basically help people, which made me an entrepreneur at like 4 years old because my
You must have
aunt.
been awesome during COVID. You'd be like, fuck that vaccine. That shit is
Oh yeah,
no
I'm
go.
I had the documents because since I have this law background, you have basically every commercial proceeding has four doors: yes, no, silence, which is presumed acceptance, or conditional acceptance. You would just say, I conditionally accept upon the proof of claim of, or just I accept if, which you say if someone like knocked on your door, worst case scenario, Bill Gates' wet dream, knocked on your door and says mandatory vaccine. Your response is, I conditionally accept upon proof of claim, or I accept if on the grounds of, are you a doctor? And then they go, well, no, no, sorry, I can't take this. I'm willing, but you're not a doctor. I can't accept medical treatment from non-doctor. If they say yes, then you say, so that means you took the Hippocratic oath. And then they go, yeah, which is kind of presumed if they're a doctor, it means they took the Hippocratic oath. And you say, when redundant again, you say, so you swore that to never cause harm. And then they're like, yeah. And
You're like,
so you
where's the trick
swear that this
question?
will not cause harm. And they're going to kind of step back and be like, yeah, it's proven to be safe and effective by the FDA, whatever bullshit, storyline that they were told. And basically, then you go, okay, this will not even cause a latrogenic reaction, which is when two or more compounds combine to potentially cause a reaction. And then they're like, holy shit, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And then you go, if they try to lie through all of those, which, no one sane person would, you go, okay, cool. Now sign this paper confirming all these things were covered, and you are liable if I have any adverse reactions. And
Hey,
you're
Mark,
the.
Mark, I
It's
just got a text from a guy named Anthony Fauci. He said, you're never going to work on CNN after hearing what he just heard from you. You couldn't possibly get a job at CNN and lie to people.
Thank
What did I
God.
say to
Maybe
him?
Trump
Oh,
will be like
hey,
anti-fake news. I like this
dear
guy.
Dr. Evil, Mark said, fuck off. Okay, got it. Sorry.
Maybe I'll be the anti-CNN fake news patrol. So
No shit.
I actually posted something on Facebook and it went viral. I literally had millions of posts. People were messaging me, "Is this real?" and all this stuff. And this one chiropractor shared it. It was this whole World Health Organization, basically proof that the vaccines were poison before most people knew about it. And when that guy was exposing it, works for the patent agency. What's his name? I can't think of it right now. Basically,
But the vice president of Pfizer, he literally went around telling people, hey, we knew it was poison.
yeah, no, it's bad. Like it's basically I try to tell everybody, but the worst thing is
Hey,
my
Mark, hold on a
under.
second. I just got a text from Bill Gates. He said, "Oh, I serve Satan, and therefore everything you say must be wiped off the internet. This podcast will never see the light of day." All right, hold
Yeah,
on one second.
along with his
Fuck
patent.
off, Billy boy. Okay, gotta go.
along with his patent 666-2020 for luciferin and basically biotracking human monitoring movements using smart dust injected into you. And
Yeah, that
so
guy's straight up evil. In fact, when he got divorced, there was an article I read that said his wife divorced him, and then they say, well, why did you divorce him? In some sort of document, he cheated on me, blah blah blah. And the section where she filled that out, I could no longer live with the secrets I had to keep. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, can we
Epstein.
get her on a podcast? I just want to know what secrets is she talking about?
Well, I could probably get you on a podcast with my friend Ian Halperin. He was part of the Nelson Mandela's apartheid movement, and he's made Michael Jackson's both number one New York best time bestsellers and both of number one documentaries. And he also did a 7-hour video interview with Jeffrey Epstein. And
What?
he's
Was that
making a
was that from
documentary.
jail where he where he
No,
killed
before.
himself with toilet paper? How do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
hang yourself with toilet paper, by the way? Think
yeah,
about that
totally.
for a second.
Yeah. Just
Like
just
I'm gonna make a rope out of toilet paper. By the way, whoever
It
killed
would have at least made more
him,
sense if he
I
like gagged
totally believe that he killed
up.
himself, just so you know.
It would
Shout
at
out
least
to
make
Hillary
more sense
Clinton.
to shove the whole roll down his throat or gag to that. That would have been
No, they
more
had a
believable.
picture. They had a picture of him like hung with toilet paper around the end of the bed. And I'm thinking to myself, Hillary, you've done much better work in the past. That is horrible work on your part.
Yeah, Hillary did not do a good job on that one.
No, no, no. She did bad work. That was not even some of her best work, man. By the way, good thing Diddy got out of jail, man. Trust me, he was not long for this earth. The amount of secrets that he's got on video, oy vey. By the way, shout out to Ashton Kutcher, buddy.
Oh, it's quite beautiful the parade that they've made for their own indictments. So it's I mean it's perfect because now that Trump he's like I'm going to stop human trafficking and pretty much you're going to get the death sentence, which is honestly what these people deserve because there's really no solution to this madness. My dad said that the only real solution is amnesty though. He said we forgive you, just stop. But if they don't stop, they just need to just not be here. So I completely agree with
Yeah.
that sentiment.
And by
So,
the way, I love the attorney for Diddy when they asked him, well, why did he have 1,000 bottles of baby oil? He's like, okay, I can explain that. You know how when Costco has a really good sale? And right after that, I was like, did he just use Costco as a defense? Holy fuck. That lawyer is a genius. That guy is a genius. You know, Costco baby oil was half off. He said, fuck yeah, let's load up the truck.
rub them all down. Yeah.
By the way, shout out to LeBron.
Oh my God,
Nothing
I
like a
love
Diddy party, LeBron.
the conspiracy podcast. The proof.
Oh, I'm telling you, we're gonna get all the hashtags in. LeBron, Diddy, Ashton Kutcher. We got Epstein. We got Hillary, or is it Hillary? I keep forgetting. Hillary or Killary? It's one of those two.
Well, the broadcasting system that Megan has through her partner is the one who did actually RFK Jr.'s campaign. So we're actually turning that into a digital blockchain-based broadcasting system so that information
Now, when
can't
you say blockchain based, I know you're not going to stream over the blockchain because the latency would be horrible.
there I won't share too much, but there actually is a solution for that. Sounds insane, but there's a guy who actually
I'm going to go
made
with insane. I'm going to
the
go
blockchain.
straight up with
But
insane. I
no,
know
we're
a
not
little
going to
bit about
stream.
blockchain, and I know a lot about latency, and I know what the blockchain is good for and what it's not good for.
Well, write this from the record, but basically, there's this guy in Romania, and he worked for
Wait a
telecoms.
second. Are
And
you talking about Andrew Tate? Are you
no,
invoking Andrew Tate when it comes to a technical discussion?
no, no,
And do you
no.
see
There's
how
a
many
guy.
hashtags we're getting in this conversation? We just got
What's
Andrew
his
Tate.
name?
By the way, Tristan Tate too, just since you guys are a pair.
What's his name? He's Ovidiu Toma is his name. He has a company called what the hell is that? It's basically he made this first blockchain encrypted satellite smartphone, and it's I went to Dubai for it. They flew me out there in 2019 for the first public unveiling of this thing. And this guy worked for
Does it
telecom.
work?
Yeah, so he worked for telecom. It used to have a half a second latency, so it was kind of shitty because it was this weird delay. but then he cleaned it up, and then now there's like barely any delay. And you know how he did it?
Does this phone even exist? Because I've been in crypto
Yeah,
so
no,
long.
I know. I'm a freaking blockchain nerd ass geek to the max. I'm just like full like I went out to Dubai, like when I'd never been to Dubai. I had no clue. I was like, oh God, I don't know if I want to go out here. I don't know what the laws are. And basically they offered me €1,000 to fly out there. So I was like, sure, why not? So it was worth 1,500 Canadian because the Canadian dollar is worth shit. So basically I was like, okay, cool. So most of the flights was like 1,300, 1,800. I was like, shit, this is not worth it. So
So
I found a flight.
what do you think of Canada becoming the 51st state?
Well, it's better than becoming the 1011th Chinese communist state. So it's
That is true.
he's like making stuff in the background. He didn't expect that one, but it's just pretty easy. You know, it's
I
pretty
got
straight
somebody that
up.
just got back from her walk and she came flying up the stairs. She's like, wait a second. Wait a second. Are we doing a podcast? Where's Chubby Cheeks?
She's in the kitchen getting fed as she likes.
Oh my
So
God.
basically, this led me into a whole journey. So I went to study medicine, and then I shadowed. There we go. It's photobomb.
There we go. Where's Chubby Cheeks? Where's Chubby Cheeks?
Oh,
What's up, Cinnabon? What's up, Cinnabon? I know. Look at Theo. Theo, look, it's Cinnabon. It's Cinnabon. I was like, what do you mean, Cinnabon? I'm hungry. That sounds delicious. All
those
right, give
places
me one
are
second, guys. Give me 1 second. Come here. Come here. Come here. Get in here.
those terms of full conspiracy.
I know that. I was like, they're gonna be so. You can fix the water. They have water.
Get another jug, sure.
Yeah, but I used it to make.
Like a party in here.
Megan needs to put another water jug on.
I think I'm the only man in America that has a babysitter for his dogs. And she comes and walks them once a day while I'm doing Zoom calls and podcasts. And yeah, they go out to the desert and go running. So the big guy's barking. He's like, wait a second, I want to go for a walk. So you've got an interesting journey, and I love a lot of the stuff that you've learned about trust because living trusts are a great tool. And it's sad because the rich people in the world for years, decades, have learned about living trust. So that's why they always call it a trust fund baby. They make sure that their children are set up with a trust so that they can shelter them and help them build wealth tax free over the lifetime of their life.
And when they die, they don't have to have a will and a lawyer take however much of their cut because as long as there's another trustee.
Well, most trusts have a will built in now.
Yeah. So basically, but you don't have a lawyer executing it if you teach your son or your heir how to continue executing trust. Because
you can make them your executor of your trust, and the trust just keeps going. It's a living trust.
Because it dying in trust terms means to fail as a trustee. So as long as there's still another trustee, it keeps going. So basically, I wanted to study medicine, and I shadowed this pharmaceutical guy who's basically was the leading pharmacist in my area in Daytona Beach. And he, within a few days, he's like, oh, I don't give these things to my family. And I'm like,
what things?
Like pills. And I'm like, what? Like, you're a pharmacist. This is like what you do. And he's like, yeah, they're all poison. I was like, what the hell? Like, this is your job. This is literally what you went to school. He's like, yeah, that's exactly why I do this. Because as far as I went into medical student debt, I had no other option to pay it back. And so basically people say they have a midlife crisis. I say I had a quarter life crisis because everything I sought after, was going to be doctor and, successful, make over 6 figures, make my mom proud and all this stuff, which just shattered. And so I'm like, okay, what do I do? And basically at 17 is when I first smoked weed. And I'm like, holy shit, if smoking this makes me think like this, what else does, all these plants and medicines and herbs and everything do?
Well, the thing that's interesting is the human body, basic human being only uses anywhere from the low end 10% of their brain to on the high end 12% of their brain, which means there's about 88% of our brain we're not using. Now,
Yeah,
if you're a Democrat, you're only using as much as 4% of your brain, but that's a whole different discussion.
exactly.
But it always amazed me, and I always think to myself, what's the other 88% of our brain doing? And how can we tap into that? Like I always think to myself, that's like hard drive space that's locked behind like a password. And if we ever figure out that password, we're going to find all kinds of goodies in that hard drive space.
It's called DMT. Just straight up. It's literally dimethyltryptamine. It's made from tryptophan amino acid converted to melatonin, serotonin, pinealine, 5-MeO-DMT, and DMT in your
Here's
brain.
the crazy thing. When I did ashwagandha and DMT, I'm not kidding you.
Ashwagandha or ayahuasca?
I'm sorry, ayahuasca. I actually thought I could travel beyond the Earth. Like I actually thought I was able
Yeah.
to see the sun, the moon, the stars, Mars, Jupiter. I was able to like literally see myself traveling. And it's weird because there's a scientific study, and I don't know how scientific it is. Maybe it's not even scientific. Maybe it's just pure story. But it's a thought process that the way mankind will travel into the future and be able to travel light years is not that your body will travel, but your mind will travel, that you will travel spiritually, for lack of a better
I
word.
mean, the CIA has this extensively documented remote projection, like astral travel. All this stuff is extremely scientifically proven to the point of they have entire labs to go and basically get secrets from other governments and stuff like that that you wouldn't be able to otherwise with LSD, psychedelic studies, light therapy, sound therapy, binaural beats, focusing on brain waves, all this. I have a chart that has the frequency of every cerebral spinal column thing to activate organs. You name it. It's insane the level of stuff that I got exposed to. So basically, studying medicine, I got exposed to the entire medical realm was a fraud. Basically, the only reason that we trust Western medicine is because of surgeons, not because of doctors. Because you get shot, they pull a bullet out, you heal, that's a miracle. You get your arm cut off, they stitch it back, it still works, that's a miracle. But doctors are absolutely nowadays the worst ever because all they're trained on is pharmacology and how to prescribe pills. And they don't even know what pills to prescribe. You do the little 5-minute consultation with the doctor. They go, oh, sorry, I'm going to go check you out for a second. They literally go Google that shit on their database to find what they need to prescribe you according to what's going to give them the best insurance rates and incentives and bonuses and vacations from the last conversation from the last pharmaceutical rep. And I learned this because after I went fully holistic, I started working for this basically supplement store in Ormond Beach, Florida, which is called Love Whole Foods. And I was the supplement guy. So when you came in and I had to know every freaking supplement, which was the perfect thing because now instead of just knowing the herbs and the medicines and the things that heal, I had to know the companies, the supply and how what their own wording and what I could say and what I couldn't say, even though I knew certain things would do certain things, but I still couldn't say it. So basic and how to find it at a good cost. So that kind of pissed me off on a level because I now am looking at the wholesale sheets of these things and how much they're selling for on the shelf. And I'm like, damn, no wonder people can't afford this shit because the markup is insane. But it's not the store's fault because they have overhead shipping, employees, insurance, refrigeration, just you name it. It's so many costs that they're barely making 30%. And that's not a good margin for a business, which most business,
Not Whole Foods.
no. And so basically, I was like, we have to have a better system. So I started my own company and I started with essential oils, which basically it's called Natural Nirvana in Daytona Beach. Now we moved to Port Orange, which is just south of Daytona. And I started finding these essential oil bottles that were like 5-pound jugs. I mean, these little tiny bottles are sold for like $40. I used to work for this company. Young Living was my first network marketing experience. And those things are so freaking expensive. Mind you, the quality's perfect, but it's just way too expensive for the average person to be able to actually use these on an everyday basis, which they should. But I started getting 5-pound jugs of it, and the cost was so cheap compared to all these things. I was able to sell it for a fraction of the cost. Basically, I turned a model of getting people access to food and medicine for cheaper because I was buying it in bulk So I was getting a huge discount. I would pass the discount on everybody else, basically cutting out all my competitors because they're not going to cut profits and, sacrifice whatever. But I was still making a very healthy profit because of the amount of bulk that I was buying.
I know, you know who Michael Turpin is? He's a big Bitcoin guy, crypto guy.
I've heard of him. I don't know too much about him.
He's texting me. I'm going to introduce you guys one day together. You're going to love Michael. He's probably one of the biggest OGs in crypto. I've known Michael for going on 20 years now. He just wrote a Bitcoin book. I interviewed him on it and we did a podcast. So FYI.
Perfect. I love it. I'm super into food, water, shelter, medicine, basically supply chain. How the hell do we have such modern technology yet there's people starving? It's just it's planned. When you learn enough about it, you're just like, this is on purpose. It's not because we can't do it. So basically I learned about medicine. I went fully holistic. I went fully natural. I went into plant medicine. I'm part of the largest ayahuasca group in the world called União do Vegetal. They're out of Brazil. They have like 30,000 members just in Brazil alone, and hundreds, tens of thousands all over the world. The owner of Maker's Mark, that whatever alcohol with the melted wax all over it, he did one of our ayahuasca ceremonies, and he had this full like, holy shit, I'm selling spirits and seeing demons, and like he's like, oh my god, I can't do this. He was like several generations deep, inherited the company. He sold it. And he paid for lawyers, and only União do Vegetal is allowed to legally consume ayahuasca within the United States because of the law and everything. And now they have farms out in Hawaii. It takes 5 years to harvest, and they have a shit ton of it. So basically, they even have prophecies that this is what's going to actually supply all the ayahuasca and awakening and all this stuff. So basically, I went into that, and then around when I was like in my late teens, I get a phone call. My mom gets a phone call, and it was my half brother from Canada. My dad had paid a detective agency to find me because he's like, I know I have a half brother out there, but we lost contact. And because my parents divorced when I was like 10, my dad moved back up to Vancouver, and he lost contact with me because it was before cell phones, and we moved at the same time. So when we tried to contact the last landline, we lost contact. So he ended up moving back to Vancouver, Canada from Florida. And little did I know, my dad pretty much became a full-scale pot activist. And right after I first started
Not shocking, by the way. Not shocking.
Yeah. And so he basically was famous because he was one of the original guys, because the grows back then, they were more worried about janks like robbing them than the cops. So
basically,
janks, like, street people, like basically robbing them, like basically criminals robbing their grow rather than even getting caught by the police. Because in Canada, it was like pseudo legal. You could do it under this MMAR, MMPR, or this medical crap. But basically, it was like so changing and so fluid that they couldn't really put their finger on it. So people were doing it anyways, even though it was like gray. It wasn't white or black. It was, not fully legal, it was pseudo legal. So this was before, it was fully legalized, which is not even fully legalized because it's not truly decriminalized. So basically, I get in contact with my half brother, and I'm like, hey, you know about where about dad is? And he's like, yeah, we do, but he's like actually on the newspaper and on TV, and he's arrested quite often, and he's been a Supreme Court. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, he's like a pretty famous pot activist. He has tons of videos on YouTube. And I'm like, what? I'm like, YouTube, and there's my dad. And I'm like, holy shit. And I show all my smoke, like, weed buddies, and they're like, what the hell? That's your dad? And then we're just like ripping bongs, like laughing. And he literally rips bongs and blows smoke in the camera, and then goes on a political rant for an hour. And then with this other famous guy called Marijuana Man, who is direct descendant of Thomas Paine, and his dad is like a 34th degree Freemason, and he's telling me about secret underground military bases in Richmond, Canada, and BC. And I'm like, what the hell? So my brain is getting blown, and I'm just like, this is far out. I knew about this stuff, but like getting firsthand accounts of all this stuff. So basically, my dad invites me up to Canada because it was 420 coming up soon in 2012. And he's like, "Do you want to come for 420? I'll buy you a ticket." So literally, I fly in almost midnight, 419, groggy, get to my dad's house, and we smoke a joint. And he has this full on prophetic download for me. And he tells me basically how this whole story, because I really, I was 10 when my parents divorced. He stuck around for like 2 or 3 years, as long as he could. And when we lost contact, he just went back to Vancouver. So I pretty much didn't have contact with my dad from about 13 to about 17. And when I get in touch with him, we smoke this joint and he starts, going off. And he tells me that when this whole story about his dad and never get a birth certificate and all this sovereignty stuff and it says you keep trust, the Vatican trust and estates and offshore, I'm like, holy shit. And he basically at 10 years old is when his dad died. And he was so distraught, he ran to the church and threw himself on the altar and was crying. And he said he had an out of body experience. And he was visited by an angel who comforted him and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, your dad, but this is all part of the divine plan. Just follow what your dad said and follow God's word, and you'll be all right." So my dad basically, that's why he never got a birth certificate, because that's what his dad told him. And he was one of those old school guys. My dad told me, and so I'm going to do that. So basically, he tells me this whole thing, and then he says also when he was 54, I think, and he even sings the Beatles song, "When I'm 54." So basically, is that 64, 54? But basically,
4. Yeah, well, we're
okay,
not
so
60, yeah, I think it's 64.
or yeah, he sang that song when he was 64, but basically 7 years before he passed, he was going to Supreme Court and pushing all these things, and basically a super political pot activist. He says he's a politician and basically makes the cops hate him, but the sheriffs love him because they're like, he's eccentric. He's not a criminal. He's just very passionate about cannabis. So basically, he went to this church seeking religious asylum because he felt like he was being like followed by men in suits. And he was, but the church thought he was just, schizophrenic or something. And then he's like, "No, like, please help me. I'm doing this. I'm basically trying to trigger the Grand Awakening, yada, yada." And they called the cops on him. 4 cops showed up. He's like, "Get the F off me." And the 4 cops beat him to death. They literally stomped his face and he barely had teeth. They broke his chest plate in half. His sternum
Wow.
separated. And to his account, he had an out of body experience and where he met Archangel Michael. And Archangel Michael revealed that he was the angel that visited him when he was 10 years old and basically said he felt like he had a 4-hour conversation. Basically, had a DMT trip, went to the other side, had an encounter with Archangel Michael, and he comforted and told him all this stuff they need to know. And then he said, "Do you want to stay here with us or go back to Earth?" And he's like thinking, and apparently Archangel Michael picked up his thoughts. And he says, "Oh, well, don't worry. Like, you won't get entangled or forget this experience. Like, and however long you want to stay, and if you even start thinking you want to come back, we'll arrange some way you come back and you'll come back here. You earned your keep, bro. Like, don't worry. Like, you're good." And so he's like, "Oh, shit. On that note, like, sure." So Archangel goes off into other discourse, now telling him more stuff. And he basically explained why he needs to come back to Earth. And he said to explain what is God's new covenant. And mind you, I was very, like spiritual, but I wasn't too religious. But this made me understand all of it, put it into proper perspective. And he says, he even quoted a Bible verse, and he says in Romans 18, it says, "If we are children and are to become sons, does that not mean we inherit the earth? If we inherit the earth, does that not mean we share in the burden, the share in the glory?" And it's posed as a question, so it's like a riddle, and thus makes it one of the most disputed lines of the Bible. There's a whole philosophical debates over just this thing, because it says we are children and are to become sons. Some people think there's only one son, but it says we are to become sons. Does that not mean we inherit the earth? So inheriting the earth, that's pretty controversial. And if we inherit the earth, does that not mean we share in the burden? So sharing in the burden is God's burden. So it's doing the same thing God does, and sharing in the glory, so sharing in God's burden. And the very next verse says, all past suffering will seem insignificant to the glory experienced by those who basically share in the burden and glory. He explained that the answer to that riddle is what's called the new covenant. He said Abraham's trust was Abraham was good and righteous for he upheld God. He said upholding God was the old covenant. He says the new covenant, he says, explains in some Revelations verses, is augmented by one word and takes away nothing. And that one word is going from upholding God to upholding God's creation. And he says this is the linguistic factor that connects and explains all and remedies all the dogma and basically removes all the religiosity, because and he even said it's supposed to be the rule of law, because if the rule of law was to uphold God's creation, you couldn't dump toxins in the ocean. You couldn't enslave children. You couldn't, it would just be clearly like, that's not upholding God's creation. So he said he after he told them this, and after what felt like this 4-hour conversation and agreeing to come back to earth, Archangel Michael gave him he said a weird smile, and he's like, huh? And then he started walking towards him. And he's like, you're hanging out with someone for 4 hours, and then they give you a weird smile and start walking towards him. And he got closer and closer and closer. And he said he turned around and stepped into his body. At which point he said everything turned white. He felt like he was doing backflips, and he got this chain download vision of future, present, past, all the way back to earth. And he popped into a room with his dead body on the floor. All these cops, holy shit, trying to wake him up, resuscitate him, because if the last time some pastor calls the cops and these cops beat you to death, like they're going to prison, basically. So they were in some shit. They were like, do we call the ambulance? Like, try to resuscitate him first. They were freaking out because they were fucked. So my dad's watching this from his body, hovering above. He saw the silver cord attached from his belly button to his soul's belly button. And then, bam, goes back into his body. And literally, he says, I think it was about 4 minutes on earth, which equated to about what felt like 4 hours on the other side, because time dilates when you're, and I've experienced that. So basically, he comes back in his body, and mind you, broken chest, barely any teeth, like beat to death, goes and stands up. And these cops are like, holy shit! They're like freaked because this guy was dead, And basically, he stands up, gets in his face, literally like blood, all because his teeth are all broken. He goes like this, like spits his teeth out and has blood all over him. Probably looked like a freaking zombie. Looked at him and he goes, are you done? In the cop's face. And the cop just basically was so scared. They try to arrest him again. He's like, get the F off of me. They threw him down a flight of 13 stone steps in the United Church in Vancouver, Canada, like in the center of downtown Vancouver. He said a flash of light shows up out of nowhere, and he catches the railing, and he swings around. And those people that have those weird little chest pockets like here? My dad had one of those, and after sternum breaking...
I know this. I know this part of the story. And an alien popped out.
Exactly. So basically, he grabs the railing, swings around, and his chest goes pop, and he had a flat chest ever since then. And something about that flash.
I was kind of hoping the whole alien thing was real, because I've seen so many versions of Alien that I was like, I knew that was real.
So whatever this flash of light was freaked the cops out, because he didn't know what they saw, but he just saw a flash of light because he's falling down the stairs. Whatever these cops saw, he caught himself. His chest pops back in place. He caught his fall holding the railing. Didn't bust his head open because they were probably just gonna, cover it up by, oh yeah, he's struggle, altercation, fell downstairs, now he's dead. So they didn't have to account for it. So he basically falls down the stairs, catches his fall, and whatever these cops saw with his flashlight, they just walked down the stairs, were like pretty freaked out, and just like walked right out. And he looked at all their badge numbers and basically recounts this entire story. So basically, he was appealing this case because his cannabis shop was shut down because he was an officer. He pretty much ran the Marijuana Party of Canada, and he wasn't the guy who set it up, because the guy said it was called Blair Longy. He's the president.
What's the status of marijuana in Canada these days? It's legal, right?
So it's legalized, which basically means fully regulated. You have to irradiate the weed, which means microwave it, which then causes it to be dry and shitty and has spider mites and mass farmed. It's terrible. It's the worst stuff. It's basically the only alternative.
Yeah,
So
I've never heard of microwaving weed. Like I don't
no,
even.
they call it
I'll be honest with you. The only reason I would do that is so that everything after that I microwave has the fermentation and smell of good weed. My oatmeal in the morning would be so much better. Some blueberries. I'd be like, oh my God, this smells just so really good.
So this was like in 2012, and all this experience my dad tells me about, and he had ran for the federal election in 2004. And when I had experience with him, and then had a few other,
Mark, did he run in 24 this year?
No, 2004 in Vancouver. So that's when my dad ran. And I ran in 2015 when I flew back from India after spending 5 months, 6 months there and studying medicine still. And he's like, slapped the federal election papers. He's like, where do you want to run? Vancouver East or Vancouver Quadra? I'm like, Dad, I don't know anything about politics, especially Canadian politics. I've basically lived in Florida my whole life, between Brazil and Florida. So he's like, do you think politicians know anything about politics? I'm like, oh, Dad, come on, man. So he's like, exactly, sign here. Just pick where you want to run. So I picked Vancouver Quadros, the richest riding in Vancouver. And it was where all the posh play UBC. Wreck Beach was his famous nude beach. I was probably the only politician to ever campaign naked.
Hey, Mark, I got to interrupt you for a second. Normally, I have a hard time explaining to people that really good podcasts involve you telling a story every now and then. Buddy, I got news for you. You fucking crushed the story part of this podcast. Crushed it. You get the award 2024 champion storyteller.
Thanks. So basically, I ran and I was campaigning, offering pot cookies and coconut waters on a nude beach. It's the most famous we call Wreck Beach. Is in University of British Columbia, but it's on unceded Coast Salish territory, like Indigenous land. So there's not Canadian laws there. So that's why they made it a nude beach. Clothing optional. But basically, I was the people I met people. They were like, "Hell yeah, I'm voting for you." So you have to get 100 votes. There's 4 qualifications to run for the federal election in Canada. You have to have a signature from the party president, party auditor, a deposit of $1,000, and at least 100 signatures from people who live in your electoral district association, which is basically your zone of where people come and vote for you. So they have to get signatures. That doesn't mean they're going to vote for you. It means that they don't mind to see you on the ballot. So for 2 months, I'm walking up and down the street, collecting signatures, meeting people, and I'm running for the marijuana. Oh, you have a joint? Of course I do. How can I say no, right? It's like, you're the mayor. You don't have a joint. You're a loser. So I obviously, smoking like 10 to 20 joints a day. I'm like high as a kite, but I'm like on a level because I'm just campaigning, right? So basically, I ran for the federal election. I think I only got 135 votes, which was literally the number of people that I got signatures from. So every single person I had a full-on personal experience with voted for me. And I did have some people that later I met, they're like, I voted for you. I was like, what the hell? Like, thanks. So basically, I learned all about like trust and estates from my dad. But then, dude, I was sitting at a bar, it's Pub 340. It's on Main.
Shout out to Pub 340.
Yeah, Pub 340. My dad and his friends. It was like Cheers. They met every Tuesday and Friday at 340 at Pub 340. And they had beers and pitchers and sat and talked shit. So basically,
wait a second. What was your dad's name? Norm?
No.
You watched Cheers before, right?
Yeah.
Remember when Norm would walk in? Norm.
Yeah. No, they had their own table with like a paraphernalia and like pictures. They're like dedicated, reserved every Tuesday and Friday. So
yeah, your dad was seriously drinking a lot during that time frame. When you have paraphernalia over your own table, it
was his table. Ray Saunders, who actually just passed a few like in November this year, just like a few months ago, not even a few weeks ago. And he was the famous clock guy who made the steam clock in Vancouver and made clocks all over the world. He's like a famous steam clock guy. Him
Clocks are
and
amazing, by the way.
they were just the coolest guys. So basically, it was the coolest group of guys. And my dad was one of these guys, and they loved his stories because he's, super eccentric and, politician. And basically, we walk around the corner into the alley, and we always smoke a joint and then go back in and finish our beers and go out for whatever, how many times. One of the times we're out there smoking, this guy walks up and he's like, "Hey, can I smoke with you guys?" We're like, "Yeah, whatever, here." So he comes back in with us. He's like, "Can I sit with you guys?" And he sits with us, and he starts telling me that he's like this, and this is while I'm actively campaigning. And he starts telling me that he has this international protected person status and has this special marking
Who
passport.
does?
This guy, he's from Japan, and he's white, but he starts telling me this stuff. And he's like, I'm part of this secret organization, and do you want to
Hey,
come
his
to
name
the?
Roger Ver?
I don't know.
You know who Roger is, right?
No, I don't.
Oh, they call him Bitcoin Jesus. A friend of mine, I've known him for.
Oh yeah. Now I recall. I heard his name. I think I've seen. I'm on the Bitcoin channel on Telegram, so I see all this shit, but I don't know them personally. So
Yeah, no, I've known Roger for 12 years. He's in a little bit of a pickle right now, but hopefully Trump will pardon him and Edward Snowden and Julian
we
Assange
can
because all
we
of
can
those
actually
guys.
help them out through trademark law. Basically, you trademark your name and you remove all record of your name through all kinds of methods. So we can speak about that, and we can help them out. So basically, this guy is telling me all this stuff, showing me his passport, saying he's from Japan, and after Hiroshima, or no, after the nuclear power plant went off, he moved over here. So he starts telling me, and then he invites me to the Bohemian Grove, and I was like,
Wait a second. Bohemian
dude,
Grove. Well, hold
yeah,
on one second. I'm texting Alex Jones right now.
exactly,
Grove.
dude. This guy
All right, hold
invites,
on. Alex is going to call me. He's going to get in.
yeah,
The call.
and I've seen this interview before. And I'm like, dude, I'm offended. I'm like instantly like, sorry, I'm not gonna be your next human sacrifice. I looked him
Yeah, no, I'm telling you.
and
Pretty sure, pretty
dude,
sure that was on the menu.
my dad is like a super activist, like pressing buttons, in the system. Went to Supreme Court 3 times, like really effing stuff up globally for the crown system, because his 3 Supreme Court cases, if any of them went through, it would have erased all debt on earth. He actually found 3 different ways to make it happen. And basically,
I'm going to guess that none of those three ever saw the light of day.
no, not yet, because basically his test didn't work. He actually was in court with Paul Hancock, who's John Hancock's 30th descendant, and he was the director of births and deaths of British
So when
Columbia.
people ask him, "Hey, can you give me your John Hancock?" He's like, "Oh, no, I'm going to give you my Paul Hancock."
Paul Hancock, yes. Basically,
All right, so Mark, listen. We've had a great talk. We're going to break this up into 72 parts, and this is going to be part one. And we're going to do 71 more interviews because you're literally the greatest storyteller I've ever had. But I got another podcast in about a half hour, and I love chopping it up with you, but we're going to keep everyone on the edge of their seat. I'm actually not joking. We're probably going to end up doing like 72 parts. But I want to get into some of the other things that we wanted to talk about
okay,
tomorrow or the next day. But in the
okay.
meantime, happy fucking New Year's Eve.
Yeah, you too.
2025 be your best year ever. I hope you absolutely crush it on every level. And you have been amazing to talk to. And by
I
the way,
appreciate
tell
it.
Cinnabon that's her new nickname. I know she's only 9 months old, but I like to give small children nicknames. And when she grows up and she hears somebody scream Cinnabon, that'll be me.
She laughed. She laughed when you said that.
I know she's like, oh my God, that's the greatest stripper name ever. I'm gonna be Cinnabon.
Oh no!
All right,
Don't put that on us.
so
That's
listen,
just
let's chop it
a
up either tomorrow or the next day and go to part two because we got still a lot to cover.
Okay, perfect. Because
All right.
I don't like to skip over this shit because it's just too iconic, you know.
I'll be honest with you. Like I got 48 clips, and we've covered weed. We literally named everybody in the book. You know, Diddy, Hillary Clinton, fuck everybody. We got so many hashtags. People are gonna be like, what are they talking about?
Well, I didn't want to go to Bohemian Grove. I basically said, "F you,
Well,
no."
I'll be honest with you. Alex Jones just texted me, and he said, "Smart move in not going to Bohemian Grove."
Exactly. I would have probably not been here. I've probably been like on an effigy strapped to it or something. You know?
The
So
fact that you and I both know about Bohemian Grove, and the fact that there's a guy like Alex Jones that lives in this planet Earth and was able to expose Bohemian Grove for what it is, it gives me hope that there's more people in the world that are willing to fight and ask questions. And the one thing crypto will teach you in life: verify everything, verify it all.
yeah,
Trust nobody, verify it all.
yeah. Yeah, it blew me away because once I ran for the federal election, I actually learned how the Freemasons structure their entire secret society. Literally, they have
Shout out to
unincorporated,
the Freemasons.
yeah, they have unincorporated trusts and society, which they're literally the business purposes is benevolent services.
Now, you
Under
guys
that
are doing
cat,
some stuff with trust on the blockchain, right?
yeah. So that's
All right, so we're
exactly
going to go deep dive into that tomorrow or the next day.
perfect.
That's going to be part of our second part of 72-part series.
Because this literally, we've automated this system and through a smart trust system on the blockchain to teach people how to become their own unincorporated trust, unincorporated society, have offshore bank accounts, which are non-interest bearing trust accounts, which aren't FDIC insured because they can't touch the funds in the first place.
All right, we got to talk about that. Listen, he's Mark. He's Heel Estate. He is a beast, and he is an amazing story to be told. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? Or the
Perfect.
next day, whichever day works better.
Well, just so you know, heal is have everyone achieve lifestyle so we can help Earth awaken love. Two acronyms for heal.
Oh, I fucking love that. Way to go, man. Good job, Mark. All right, Mark.
Well,
Say goodbye to
what do
everyone.
we do to Megan? So she's the other awesomeness
What's up,
powerhouse.
Schmegan? What's up, Cinnabon?
Cinnabon.
She's like
Hey,
Cinnabon.
Cinnabon.
She's
yeah.
waving.
What is that? You call that a wave? You call that a wave? Is that you're like, whoa, hello, hello, hello?
Get out of here.
Awesome.
Right.
I'll let you go to your other podcast. We'll do 2 of 72 next. So
Peace out, Mark. Good job. Well done, sir.
bless, brother.